One of the most exciting parts for every Bible student is to recognize and rediscover the fact that God not only tells story and history, he foretells story and history in dramatic ways. I want to talk for just a few minutes, picking up right where we left off, Jesus' entry from two different perspectives coming into the city of Jerusalem. Many of the key elements of our faith are pre-disclosed occasions. They are matched with exacting detail in the text. I want to show you one of them from two very, very simple passages. The first one comes from Zechariah. And of all the books of the Hebrew Scriptures, I got to tell you, this one's got my attention. I teach through the Bible annually, and I have to tell you, Zechariah had a gift that very few people had. He talks about this simple statement, Zechariah 9:9, "Rejoice greatly, Gili meod, O daughter of Zion, shout, O daughter of Jerusalem," Zechariah 9:9, "Behold, your king is coming to you. He's just and having salvation, but he's lowly and riding on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey." Now, that's a simple statement, but it's a profound statement. If you want to understand why it's profound, you have to understand that Zechariah has this unbelievable Frank Peretti-like gift. He has this ability to pull back a curtain and see behind it what's going on in the spiritual world. Some of I dated myself. Don't worry about it. The point is that he's able to figure. Look, go back to Sheshbazzar and Zerubbabel 536. Cyrus the Mede says you can go back and set up the temple. 16 years happens, and the fire is not burning on the altar yet. And you get down to 520, and God dispatches two guys, Haggai and Zechariah, Haggai and Zechariah, and says, get down and get some revelation and explain to them what's going wrong. Zechariah pulls back the curtain, and he says, I want to explain to you, as I ramp up to the coming of Messiah, what's going wrong with the temple's restart. And so he says, the problem is, in Zechariah 1 and 2, world powers are holding down the Jewish people from becoming what they should become, and the temple from getting started, and I'm not going to let that stand, and since I'm God, nobody else's opinion really counts. And then he says, not only that, but Joshua the high priest is looking all bummed out, and Zechariah pulls back the curtain and sees in the spiritual world that the beautiful costume of Joshua the high priest is being mudded with mud pies by Satan in the spiritual world, and what looks like discouragement of a friend is actually a spiritual attack. So world powers are against him, but satanic powers are working behind the scenes. And then he says in chapter 5, there's this floating scroll of indictment. It's a very cool scene. And he says there's secret sin in the camp, and that's also slowing things down. If you kept going with the story, you'd find out that God then dispatches a series of angelic riders throughout the earth. I'm using a little Ben-Hur action here, but they're going out and all over the earth, and he's dispatching them because he says there's a game change that's about to happen. I'm about to take my hands off Jerusalem. I'm going to reignite my temple, and I'm going to do more than that. I'm going to bring my Messiah into that temple and into that city. And so by the time you get to chapter 9 and you see that the king is coming, he's not going to come mighty and powerful. He's going to come like a servant. Now, that's cool. And we can all admit that Jesus riding in on the donkey and having the boys dispatched to get it certainly matches the detail. And Matthew makes the point that this is because of what Zechariah had promised. But you know, what if the conveyance of the animal and the way he was going to get there wasn't the biggest, most profound prophecy that was going on in that moment? What if God said not just how he was going to arrive, but when he was going to arrive? What if he put it in a math problem all the way back, long before, 183,880 days before the actual event? What if he actually told them long before it happened that it was going to happen, and when? I think he did. I want to take you, Sir Isaac Newton said this. He said, we could stake the entire truth of Christianity on one prophecy alone, this one. So I take you to Daniel, and this time in Daniel chapter 9, Historically, linguistically, the Daniel account appears to come from 530. There are many critical scholars that date it later, but the linguistic argument would place it there. Textually speaking, this is important, we have 8 copies of Daniel from the Dead Sea Scrolls. 4 of them, half the copies came from the famous Cave 4 that everybody gets a picture of. The problem is somebody broke in, rolled them all out, and then left them lay there for a couple of hundred years, and each one deteriorated into the other, so taking them apart has been a bit of a chore. But they follow the Masoretic text, and in fact, we have, 5 actual copies in Cave 4. I said 4, it was actually 5, and 1 in Cave 6 and 1 in Cave 1. The oldest copy we have is the 4Q, the one that comes from Cave 4, and that copy comes from 180 to 125 BC. This is important. So 125 years before Jesus is born, we have a copy of a prophecy, carbon dated, checked off all the boxes from science, from people who don't believe our story. That's important. So each of the copies preserves the familiar version we have in the Masoretic text. And what's important is it follows the bilingual pattern that you have. If you're familiar with Daniel, you know part of the middle section's in Aramaic and then it jumps back to Hebrew. Starts in Hebrew, ends in Hebrew. It's kind of like an Aramaic sandwich of some sort. But when you look at it, you get to Daniel chapter 9. Now watch the specifics of what he says. He says, Daniel's been praying. You know the story. And when God then communicates through Gabriel, Gabe shows up and says, 70 weeks have been decreed for your people and for your holy city, and this is what it's going to do. It's going to finish the transgression, make an end of sin, make atonement for iniquity, and to bring everlasting righteousness and seal up once and for all vision and prophecy and anoint the most holy place. Dan is really worried because he's been reading Jeremiah, and Jeremiah says they're going to go back after 70 years, and they don't go back after 70 years. It's like they're actually on year 66, and nobody's packing, and he's getting nervous. And so God says to him, let me tell you, I know you asked me when you're going back to Jerusalem. I'm going to tell you a whole lot more. I'm going to tell you when Messiah is coming, and I'm going to date it for you, and I'm going to give it to you, and then I'm going to put a copy in a cave that somebody's going to find chasing a goat in 1947. Okay? And here's what he does. He says, I want you to look closely because Jeremiah 25 had already indicated the length of time that the captivity would take place. He's not seeing it, but he says, 77s have been determined, and by the end, transgression will be ended, violation will cease, there'll be full covering of your defilement and unending righteousness. Something's about to happen that's really big, Dan. And he said, when you look at all the things, the unending righteousness one should stick with you for a minute. And then he says this, you are to know and to discern from the issuing of the decree to restore and rebuild Jerusalem until Messiah the Prince. There will be a period of time. Let's look at the math in a minute. But the point is that the clock starts at a specific moment. When a decree is given that the walls, gates, and moats of Jerusalem will be rebuilt, you can start the clock. And then when he puts the clock together, you're probably asking, why did he do it in sevens? But all great ancient Hebrew literature was divided by the Shemitah years and the 50th Yovel, the Jubilee year. Yovel actually is the Hebrew word. Jubilee comes from it. And do you remember the book of Jubilees? One guy in the Dead Sea Scrolls set actually redid the calendar all the way back to the beginning in 7-year chunks. This was a big thing in the intertestamental period, how to break the calendar into 7-year chunks. So just during this time, it's interesting, it says, I'm going to give you 7 years, then I'm going to give you more than that. I'm going to give you another 62 sevens, and that's going to give you a total of 483 years of elapsed time. I'm going to give you 7 sevens, that's 49. I'm going to give you 62 sevens, that's 434. Together, that's 483 years of elapsed time. Now, the problem is, when you're dealing with elapsed time, the way the Hebrew year works, it works in 360-day segments. There were 4 different opportunities where Jerusalem was supposed to be rebuilt, but only one of them include walls, gates, and moats. That's the one that we think dates from March 14th, 445. By the way, we can be off just a little bit on this. Robert Anderson, who did the work in 1894 in London, said that there were a number of different problems, and he outlines them. But all of them put you in the same place. If you start the clock in March 14th, 445, allowing for the Shemitah schedule, you will end up in 30, 32, or 33 in the spring of the year. There are no other choices, and they are all up to whether or not you have an Adar Sheni, the extra calendar year we shove in periodically. That's the variance of the years. There's no scholar out there that's going to say, by the way, they all fall in the spring, and they all fall just about the time within a week or two of Palm Sunday. Literally, what you do to do the math is 49 plus the 434 equals 483 years times 360 days gives you 173,880 days. I really believe that when Jesus came down the side of the Mount of Olives in Luke 19, and he wept and said, if you would have only understood this day was coming, I told you 173,880 days ago. What do you need, skywriting? And he wept because he said, this city is going to be destroyed in horrible ways. Follow what's going on in the archaeology of Jerusalem right now, because they're uncovering this and the horror of the destruction. But notice what it says. Messiah will come, but then Messiah will be cut off. And the people of the prince who is to come will destroy the city and the sanctuary. The end will come with a flood. Even to the end there will be wars, and desolations are determined. Messiah would come, but it wouldn't be in power, for he would be cut off. The city would be destroyed, but it wouldn't be its end, for more desolations after it are yet determined. What if, knowing the coming of Messiah and the cataclysm that would happen in the generation of Jesus and the one that followed him, what if it was predicted? What if it was an exacting detail? What if we had a copy from 100 years before the time of Jesus? Game over. Foretelling prophecy is validated by a shepherd boy chasing a goat.